We'll get cracking then, mate, is it?
Yeah, let's go.
Jake, are we good to go? Amazing. Right, let's get stuck in.
Excellent.
Dan Richardson, welcome to the Your PT pod.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's an honour. I'm super excited for today, genuinely. It was great to spend some time at dinner last night, getting to know your background a little bit more. Because you've been a friend of Your PT for a couple of years now, Dan, but I don't think we've ever spent that amount of time just exploring like our stories and journeys.
Absolutely.
That was intriguing.
Yeah, no, I think I've been around with you guys for some years now, and I've been in and around the fitness space for the longest time. But I think we always dip in and out of each other's lives, whether it be a conference, an event, or whatever it might be. And actually, it's great to just get some time together and hopefully get through some good stuff on today's podcast as well.
We certainly will. We'll cover some serious ground. And the theme of nutrition in personal training is such a powerful theme as well. Yeah. So I think, what I'd love to do today on this podcast is really speak to the audience that we communicate to, the personal trainers, the fitness professionals in our industry. And I normally kind of work on 3 topics here, Dan. So today we'll firstly look at the scope of practice for personal trainers, because as we know, there's blurred lines when it comes to nutrition. 100%. We'll look at practical nutrition application for personal trainers and what they should and what they shouldn't be involved with. And we'll also look at supplements as well.
Yes.
That's huge, isn't it? It's such an emerging market, and the conversation around supplementation on the gym floor happens every day.
Yes.
So we're going to cover all of that today. But thank you for taking the time to come down and be here. I know you are super busy at the moment. DRN Nutrition is absolutely flying. So let's start there, Dan. So following our conversation last night, how does someone go from selling sweets to developing this monster brand that you're now working with?
Yeah, I think my background story is somewhat interesting, I suppose, because I never really told it in full to an extent. I've always given snippets about being a semi-professional rugby player, the conversations with my dad and how that alluded to nutrition. But actually, if I go all the way back to almost like year 7 in secondary school, we started a little sweet empire with one of my good friends. And when I say sweet empire, we were at the point where we were paying people to rent out their bag space day to day to carry stock for us, because the amount we were selling, we couldn't fit in our bags. We'd bring, the little the Adidas or the JD kind of duffel bags with us on top of our bags, pretending we had PE kit in there. Sorry to any of the teachers that might be watching this. And then we got to a point where we grew that empire that we were renting out lockers for the year. So we were actually renting out someone's locker to store all the drinks in and all of the sweets in and the confectionery. And ultimately, I think we gave it up around kind of year 10 because we realised we need to probably get some GCSEs here instead of focusing on the market. But I always recall when I was younger getting back home to my parents and emptying my little kind of Union Jack wallet that had like a big zip on it with all of the pound coins in, and counting them up, and I was bringing home, 50, 60 pounds a day, and then reinvesting it back into stock for the next day at school, and ultimately building a little empire. And I remember back then, obviously not understanding money, like going out and buying BMXs and laptops and headphones and being like the cool kid almost, because I had all of this stuff coming in.
Yeah.
And I think actually when I look back at that, I learned a lot of fundamentals in what I've taken into DRN, and granted, the opposite of nutrition, selling sweets and fizzy drinks to kids, at school versus then, really optimizing nutrition for athletes. Yeah. But in between those two kind of areas, I really wanted to be a rugby player. So alongside, I suppose, the sweet empire, I really wanted to be a professional rugby league player.
Okay.
So I really tried to pursue that. When I was younger, I was playing in, classic like county squads, things like that. And then I got my opportunity to work alongside the York Knights development squad, which I thought this was it. This is my in. I don't have to go and study after college. I can go and be a rugby player. And I remember I'd been offered a position at Durham University. I was 17, 18 at the time to go and study sports science. And at the same time, the club had come to me and offered me a £60 a week contract to become a professional rugby player. And I couldn't believe it. I was made up, really excited. This was it. I could put pen to paper and become a professional athlete. Yeah. And I remember a very sharp conversation with my dad in the car as we walked away from that training session. A 60-odd-year-old Yorkshireman now, but he'll have been in his 50s back then. And he was like, look, you've got the opportunity to go to Durham and study something that potentially might result in a really good career and a job. Yeah. Or you can earn 60 quid a week and live at your mum and dad's for the rest of your life and maybe not make it. And I remember that hitting home quite a bit. And one thing he said to me that I almost was a little bit cocky about was, if you're good enough, somebody will pick you up after uni. So I really went off to uni in the intention that once I get to 21 and I finished playing rugby, that I'd go in and ultimately become a rugby player following that. And then anyway, that led me to go and do a master's degree because I didn't get picked up. Although I did play for the first team and I captained them for a couple of years, which was really good fun. There was no real offer on the table to go anywhere after university. I'd done a few trials for the Northeast up there and a few bits around some of the teams that were in the kind of lower leagues around there, but it was never going to materialise to a fully fledged full-time role. So from there, I suppose if we fast forward, going through the master's degree in sports nutrition, obviously got my MSc and then was looking for a job within professional sport. So I then went on to work actually in rugby league. And I think I did this really because I wanted to live vicariously through the athletes, you know, as we all do. We, you know, as kids, we watch these players on TV. I was stood on the sideline giving them the waters and the supplements they needed for the game, thinking, this is a real like childhood dream here.
Still in the community to a degree.
Absolutely,
aren't you?
yeah. The fans cheering all of their near me, thinking they're cheering me on with the water bottles and thinking this is brilliant. Obviously not, but I worked with Warrington Wolves for a couple of seasons, and then obviously the wonderful world of COVID hit. And that kind of really, you know, rocked the boat a little bit because I'd achieved what I wanted to achieve within my career, which was being a head of nutrition for a rugby club, and specifically in rugby league. And I thought, right, well, what's next? And COVID gave us so much time to reflect and think. And I know we spoke last night quite a bit about that pivotal moment in COVID of things going on within different businesses that ultimately results in, you know, better outcomes. And I remember sitting and thinking, well, what do I do here? Because I wasn't sure about my job going forward. Wasn't sure about how it was going to look going forward. And especially with Warrington being a rugby league club, finances in rugby league are never the prettiest. You see it publicised everywhere over social media and across the news. You know, clubs like Salford Red Devils having a really difficult time this season with the finances. And I knew there was going to be a catch to coming back from COVID. And that catch ultimately resulted in them offering me a consultancy instead of offering me something where I could go and actually, you know, be a full-time employee again. So then instead of seeing it as a setback, you know, there was a bit of time where I think, you know, driving off in the car after being told that, a little bit of you know, upset and emotion coming out of me thinking, well, this is the end of the career. And then it was kind of like this kind of saying that my granddad used to say, which is like, you either sink or swim. Or as he used to say, there's plenty of fight in the old dog left. Whenever he had his knee operations and he was still coming to York races with me, he'd always say that. And that just clicked to me. And I thought, you know what, this is really what I need to go and do. I need to go and try and fight it. Not go to the club and say I want a job, but like what else is out there? And that ultimately was the birth of DRN Nutrition. So from there, I started contacting schools, clubs, anybody who'd basically take me on for a education session, one-to-ones, whatever it might be. We didn't really specialize in any specific areas, and we found the independent school sector a really, you know, beneficial market to be within because a lot of them were in COVID. They didn't have much to do, so it was really exciting to have an online session of somebody coming in and talking about, you know, nutrition and athletes and sport. So that's where I started building that up. And we discussed last night, interestingly, my granddad passed the day before my first ever talk for DRN. And I don't know whether that's a bit of a sign or an area, but I remember sitting with my parents going, I'll have to cancel. And I was online in the garage at my parents because COVID, we couldn't go in. And my mum was like, it's what you wish what your granddad would have wanted you to do. Like, he would have wanted you to deliver this talk. And actually, it's the start of something really special. And that's always stuck with me with DRN Nutrition. So I think some people create businesses and they have some sort of affiliation with it or real kind of attachment. I think that's my piece that keeps me driving. So, you know, today we're across 120 different schools. We're across 16 professional sports outlets from GB national teams all the way down to kind of national league teams. And then we also work, obviously, in the gym space and the corporate space as well. So we support personal trainers through YPT. And then we also look towards kind of supporting businesses as well with like health-based actions. So a long-winded story, but I think it's a great one to have in there.
Dan, it's a powerful story. And there's so many lessons in there as well. I mean, I've been making some notes as you're going through that. But I think the pivotal moments seem to be happening when you're in pain to a degree, or your back's against the wall. So COVID, there was lots of examples. You know, people were being really creative, starting to think laterally because there was no guarantee that the world was going to go back to normal. So there's been a lot of business success that was born out of, you know, the pandemic. But I think your characteristics, you know, as a year 7 pupil, having that entrepreneurial mindset have definitely kind of accelerated your growth. And we talked a little bit about this. You know, I use a phrase often within our business of having an employee mentality.
Yes.
So a lot of people they will accept mediocrity, and they need to be in a slipstream, and they need, you know, regimented processes and a paycheck every month, and that's fine. But you know what you've demonstrated, I think, in the tough times, is entrepreneurial spirit, and the success leaves clues everywhere. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from your story, Dan. But, you know, even from the sporting background, you know, not making it in pro sport, but knowing that is an environment that you enjoy.
Yeah.
I think everyone should be aspiring to do something that they love, because within that environment, it's the only environment to thrive and develop as an individual. So I absolutely love that story. It's phenomenal. And so in terms of, you've alluded to it slightly there, Dan, so you're working across multiple kind of sectors at the moment, you know, educating in schools, professional athletes, fitness professionals. What's a typical day look like in your world at the moment?
Yeah, I think very mixed. And I think just going back to that point you were saying there, I think there's a lot of similarities with personal trainers with my story, because a lot of them are failed athletes, as much as they won't want to admit it. And staying within that fitness space or that sports space is so important for them. So, you know, for personal trainers listening, I think just keep pushing through that, because yes, you might be a semi-professional footballer trying to personal train at the same time.
Yeah.
But actually a lot of what you learn in being an athlete can be translated into the gym floor. Yeah. But yeah, I think a typical day for me is, well, coming down here to be on a podcast and then shooting away from here with a few calls, meetings, one-to-ones, and then delivering at a school this evening over in Malvern is today's kind of, I suppose, agenda. And then tomorrow, once I get home tonight, quick rest up, and then I'm across to Leeds United in the morning, working with their under-9s to under-21s. Yeah. So predominantly tomorrow I'll be with the 18s and the 21s, so the older age groups of the academy. Yeah. And then in the evening, I'm going across to Warwick University to launch our program over there with their sports scholars, which is really exciting to be involved in. And then back to Leeds the next morning, and then I'm actually at a ball on Friday night, so I'm going to a charity ball, which should be really enjoyable for a little bit of, I say, respite, but there's always some networking to be done at a charity ball, and for a great cause as well. So I think my kind of day-to-day or week-to-week never looks the same, and that's something that I actually enjoy. I know, like you say, the employer mentality, some people enjoy the same week by week, but even like, you know, when we look at you know, the structure of what I get up to, and, you know, a lot of my friends who work full-time Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, get really confused why I'm willing to go to an event on a Saturday, as I am this week. I'm going to an event, and we'll allude to the cactus juice on the prickly pear cactus juice on the table, who I'm going to the event with shortly, I'm sure. But week on week, it never looks the same. And I think, you know, managing a calendar is something that I get quite fulfillment and joy out of. So, you know, when we were organising this podcast, knowing that you're in the middle of nowhere, I say nowhere, but in the middle of Wales, the south of Wales, which is very far from me, it was, how can I tie in other work that I can ultimately do when I'm down here? So, you know, on the way down, as I was saying to you last night, I stopped off at just about every other service station to do different calls and meetings, and made sure that I made the day worthwhile. Although it was a 4.5 hour drive, I made it a 6-7 hour drive, but did a working day on my way down. Yeah. And then, of course, today, trying to tie it into somewhere that's as local as I can get to Swansea, which was Malvern, and make sure that I've got, you know, another kind of reason to be traveling this far. I'm doing the same on another podcast in a few weeks, where I'm across in Luton for a day with a couple of different schools. I'm traveling around the area, delivering to different schools. And actually on the Sunday, I'm going to be on a podcast that's down in London, but I was making sure that I was going to be down that side of the country before committing to going down there. And I think, you know, again, reflecting this back to the personal trainers that might be listening, there's that element and that time. And I think one thing we missed, and maybe a crucial part of the story, was whilst I was a master's student, I actually continued to be a personal trainer. So I'd done my level 2, and as we joked about, and dare I say it on camera, I didn't actually have a level 3, but the company I was working for at the time said, because I had a sports science degree, I was happy to be personal training, which on reflection, it just shows how important qualifications are, and probably get booted off this podcast saying.
No, it's very raw and realistic insight, isn't it? But yeah, I think, you know, years ago it did kind of map to a level 3 qualification, but that's changed since probably 2008, 2009. So it's been quite a period of time since that hasn't been a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes, there might be bending of rules, shall we say, which is never the right thing, because, the attitude I approach with this is that individual is then giving exercise prescription to a member of the public.
Absolutely.
That could be very detrimental.
Yeah.
So we should never be cutting corners within the sector.
And I think hypocritically, when we talk about nutrition and prescription of nutrition and the things I've got to say around that, in my learnings, absolutely, it's almost hypocritical of me to say nutrition needs to be somewhat specialist. Exactly. Whereas I was, I had a level 2, but I didn't have a level 3. But obviously, as a personal trainer, and when I worked as a personal trainer, I enjoyed the variety of days and the management of calendars. And we've got some brilliant friends in the personal training space that, work, 4 days a week and then set the calendar up so they get Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off. Yeah. Or they work 5 days a week and they have Monday, Tuesday off because that's the better days for them. And I think the job that I have now and the role that I play within DRN Nutrition, I have that choice to an extent. Obviously, as work comes in, I'm not going to turn it down on the basis that I maybe want an extra day off here and there. But, if it's my partner's birthday and we want to go and spend some time together, I can block out a weekend. Whereas when I work full-time in professional sport, if there was a fixture that weekend, there wasn't a chance that I could take the time off. Yeah. And we'd have to find a different day to do it on. And I think that's one thing that owning my own business really gave me, was the freedom and the flexibility to pick and choose. But I think sometimes like that can be a positive and a negative, because I've seen others fail in business because they pick too many days off versus days in. And I've seen personal trainers do that where they are adamant they're never going to work more than 3 days a week or 4 days a week, and they lose business because of it. Whereas I'm one of these people where you have to weigh up that balance. You have to decide, are we going to go after a big ticket item, for example, that maybe, revenue generating for years to come, or that you just want a day off because you're going to do some DIY in the house, or the garden needs cutting, the lawn needs doing, or whatever. And actually, like, you have to make those compromises. And there's very little that I'll say no to an extent. But actually, sometimes you have to prioritize life and family at times. You do.
And it sounds to me, Dan, that you've created a diary that fits your lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And not the other way around. You're not dictated by your work environment anymore. It reminds me, there's direct parallels to when Aaron and I were growing the PT business. Yeah. And one of the rules of thumb, which I'm sure you've adopted as well, is when you make a big trip, make sure that you break even on that trip. And don't let yourself off the hook with little minor details as well. And you've got that in abundance. And it was quite interesting listening to your trip, because I've done that many a time. Yorkshire and back in a day. It's a lot of ground, as you said, but like strategically planning your service stops so that you can pick up the calls and serve your clients at the same time.
Absolutely.
It's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And congratulations, Dan, on all your success so far. I feel like, though, it's only the start of what DRN is going to become. Let's dive into some of the themes. So the first one is an area of blurred lines that's been prevalent in the industry for quite some time. So personal trainers and nutrition advice. Okay. So naturally, through conversation on the gym floor, the topic of nutrition is going to come up. From your perspective, where should personal trainers be advising, and when should they stop that advice? So you can go from advice to prescription, which is never the area. If you're not formally qualified in dietetics or nutrition, that is not an area to be falling into. So from your experience, Dan, over the years, how can personal trainers navigate the questions that come up on a day-to-day basis?
For me, I think looking at it from both sides as we'll call it a fake PT, but a personal trainer to some extent, and then becoming a registered nutritionist, I can see both sides of the coin. And when I was a personal trainer, all my clients were asking me for was like a plan, a meal plan, calorie counted, weight counted plan, because I think in their eyes that's the added value, because it's individualized and it's specific to them. And I think when we think of what we charge for personal training, if we are a premium personal trainer, when we've got less competitive prices than those that are on the gym floor that are just trying to undercut us, we have to find that edge or that angle that really stands us out from the rest of the personal trainers that are out there. And nutrition can be that big facet that we can really go after. But I see a lot of PTs doing it wrong. And, I have a lot of conversations with personal trainers at events and conferences and, fitness style kind of events where I speak to them about, what do you offer to your clients as nutrition? And I think this word meal plan still comes up quite a lot. And I think it's kind of like you say, that prescription of kind of, I suppose, exercise and nutrition. We prescribe a plan for the gym, so why wouldn't we do the same for nutrition? But what I've learned over the years, even with working with, top end athletes, is that like we don't do calorie counted, calorie matched plans for athletes very often, unless they're making weight for a specific event, or unless, they really drastically need to change their body composition.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the biggest goal we can go after as personal trainers is prescribing habits. And then you can't really go too far wrong with habits as long as you're not steering too far away from the norms.
Yeah.
If we look at the big pillars of sleep, hydration, making sure we have carbohydrates in the body for energy, fats for good health and a little bit of stored energy, and obviously protein for muscle recovery and hormone balance, can't go too far wrong. So if you're prescribing, the Eat Well guide, for example, the government guidance to eating, the balanced food plate as a prescription, that I want you to follow this food plate specifically to support your, goals in health and well-being, and maybe have an extra carb or two pre-training, maybe have a little bit more fruit and veg post-training to help with recovery. That's prescription and individualization without going down the route of maybe potentially be detrimental by, potentially creating an eating disorder by getting them to weigh out, 60 grams of oats and 6 blueberries and, you can't have more than a 2-second pour of honey. I think personal trainers want the detail, because when it comes to exercise, we do drop sets, we do supersets, we do, legs, we do push pull, we do, kind of full body workouts. We prescribe specifically and individually because that's the area of expertise that we're in.
Yeah.
Whereas when it comes to nutrition, I see it as a complement to the program.
Yeah.
And I think if we can get that right, we can do some really good work with our clients without crossing that blurred line, as you say. And I think the line is blurred because there isn't really any, kind of, I suppose, protection over, yourself going, I'm a nutrition coach tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yes, you're not SENr accredited like myself, or, the BDA, the British Dietetics Association, isn't, kind of endorsing you, but nothing's stopping you using a title of nutrition coach or nutritionist. So I get when PTs see that kind of loophole and they go, I'm going to be a personal trainer and nutritionist, but I think sticking with that hard line of, really going after the habits of nutrition instead of prescribing nutrition like you would a gym plan.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you can probably look at online coaching as well in a similar light.
Yes.
Because there's no governance within online coaching. You can call yourself an online coach. But if you're a formally qualified fitness professional and you're in that environment, you have to accept that as well to a degree. But I think inevitably what happens on the gym floor is personal trainers are giving advice to the clients of what works well for them.
Yes.
And that's individual to them as someone who's aware of health, well-being, lifestyle, has a different, daily kind of structure around them than the clients that they're working with.
Yeah.
So that can be quite a dangerous area to get into. And, you have these kind of themes then of you should have X amount of protein, you should have X amount of carbohydrates. So I think alignment within that is critical. Yeah. So if I am a personal trainer and I want to serve my client correctly and just give them some advice, are there any tools or literature or documents that you can support your client with?
Yeah, so I think without plugging it too much, obviously on the PT Hub, we have some really great resources around nutrition on there that doesn't prescribe nutrition, but educates the PT in a way that they can deliver the advice and the support confidently. Yeah. And again, we're talking about advice and support. We're not talking about prescription. And I think using areas like that, because I suppose, yes, it is a shameless plug that we've got content and things on the Hub. However, what we have to consider is there isn't that much out there. When we do look at the current nutrition courses, I'd argue looking at the content that's within them, they're not very specific. They're very generic nutrition kind of education.
Yes.
And even within that course, you don't often get taught how to prescribe. You get taught, the rationale behind nutrition, which is great, but then you have to make your own mind up about how you're going to set up those plans and those meetings and those conversations. And if anything, it goes too prescriptive. Yeah. And it does start becoming meal plans within those courses that I've seen anyway online that are available.
Yeah. As I asked the question, I just realized I've completely set you up for a shameless plug. But just to circle back to that, because it is a relevant point. I think we worked hard at your PT to arm our PTs with relevant information. So we've built a suite of resources within the Your PT Hub.
Yeah.
And if you're not part of your PT, your gym operator might have, access to similar sort of documents. But we've got things like recipe guides, healthy eating guides, eating out choices, things like that, which is built more towards lifestyle kind of habits and decisions.
Yes.
So I think if we can, create habitual change through education, that's how powerful personal trainers can be in this education cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that habitual side of things is more important even in the professional sports world. We're going to talk about supplements later in this podcast. Yeah. But ultimately, that's the last word on my lips when I speak to athletes. Yeah. The first word is looking at how many hours a night are you sleeping, how well are you hydrating, and actually what are you eating day to day? Are you having 3 meals and 3 snacks? Are you having 5 meals and 6 snacks? Yeah. We just need to set out some of the habits. Okay, we're going to strip back food, but not necessarily detrimentally to our overall energy availability. What we're going to look towards doing is having 3 very balanced meals within the day. And between each meal, we're going to look for snacks that are going to be boosting our health and well-being in the fitness space. Yeah, of course. We don't have to go down the route of a huge meal plan. We just want to set structure for our clients.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess we'll move into the next phase of conversation here, Dan. So practical application for personal trainers. Yeah. So if I'm operating on the gym floor and I'm approached, with the question of weight loss, and I'm approached with the question of I want to gain muscle, how do personal trainers kind of support those conversations when they're on the gym floor? Do they approach it in a different light, or is it kind of a broad kind of conversation that you would have with those individuals?
Yeah, I think they have to do some information and fact finding, because regardless of what that person's individual goal is, their nutrition might already reflect that. So saying something such as, we'll just reduce how much you're eating and exercise more, could be really detrimental to somebody potentially with disordered eating that's already eating less, but isn't seeing the results because they're in, let's say, a starvation mode. And this is where we have to be really careful with prescribing a specific set of habits to somebody. Yeah. And similarly, somebody who's looking to gain muscle, most PTs would turn around and say, we need to eat more protein. But if we look at the science, we know that muscle protein synthesis, which is we grow from a pair of the muscles, has a threshold to it. And for the majority of the population, that's between 20 and 40 grams per sitting of a meal of protein. So if we go over that 40 grams and we tell somebody to eat double the amount of protein they're currently eating, it's going to have no beneficial effect to their muscle building properties. Yeah. So it might be that we have to look towards increasing our carbohydrate intake so we've got more energy for the sessions, so that we can actually, break down the muscles further to result in them becoming bigger and having the energy to refuel the body to recover and also repair. Yeah. So they're just 2 examples, I suppose, from there. But doing a bit of fact finding before you start jumping to a conclusion and prescribing or even just suggesting habits to a client is really important. If somebody came to me on the gym floor as a personal trainer with no nutrition experience or limited nutrition experience and said, I want to look to lose weight, my first conversation wouldn't be, how's your food looking? It'd be, how are we sleeping? Yeah. Because ultimately sleep dictates our body composition. There's been so many studies to show that if we have 2 sets of athletes or 2 sets of individuals, both on a restricted diet plan, so let's say slightly calorie deficit, both will lose equivocal amount of weight. So in the study that I can reference, and we can always put a paper in the link, it's around 3 kilograms they lost. Both groups, one was restricted in sleep and the other wasn't restricted in sleep. Okay. So one was having 6 hours of sleep a night and woken up after 6 hours. The other was having as much sleep as they required. They both lost the same amount of weight during that study. But what was really interesting was the fat-free mass, so not fat mass that was lost, within the group that slept well was much lower than those that had restricted sleep. Okay. So those that had restricted sleep, though they lost the same amount of weight, the majority of that percentage of weight loss was fat-free mass, so muscle mass. Yeah. Whereas those that were non-restricted, so had as much sleep as they wanted, lost a lot more fat mass. So when we're thinking about, kind of prescribing nutrition, we have to take it back to the fundamentals of sleep, hydration, and just general well-being. Yeah. Then, of course, we can start to build in some of those habits, as we mentioned. So it might be once you get chatting to the client in the session, all they go on about is, oh, I can't wait to have a kebab tonight. I can't wait to have a fast food takeaway tonight. I can't wait to go to the Indian restaurant tonight. I can't wait to go for a Chinese tomorrow night. And they're just reeling off all of these places they're eating. Oh, I can never be bothered cooking. Yeah. So I always just order in on Deliveroo.
Yeah.
And actually, a very simple habit that a PT can build in there for somebody that's trying to lose weight is, here's a guide of recipes. I want you to cook some of them and send me pictures of them.
Yeah,
easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a lovely example, actually.
Yeah.
I think the point around sleep, we weren't even having that conversation 10 years ago.
No.
As fitness professionals. So that it's great, that you can, because it's all about lifestyle, and nutrition would fall into that bracket as well. And what the example you just give there then, Dan, is you can, give that backed education, scientific research, and provide, the healthy eating guide or the eating out guide, which is developed by someone like yourself.
Yes.
So it's formally designed from a nutrition standpoint. What about your stance on meal timing? So there's a lot of talk in the personal training world around optimal timings, pre-exercise, post-exercise. What's your general feel and stance on meal timing?
Yeah, two parts that I think would be great to tackle and talk about is, the first is like fasted training or fasting during the day. Now, when we look at the research that's out there, we can see that there is no real difference between somebody who is fasted and somebody who's on a calorie restricted diet in terms of their weight loss or their kind of, I suppose, function as a human. Now, some people, enjoy a fasted period more from a spiritual mindset perspective, which is completely fine, quite hard to measure in the research because it's very subjective as opposed to objective. Okay. But ultimately what we see is, if we take, again, two groups, one that spends time fasted in the mornings, let's say, and the others that eat a habitual kind of routine in and around their day-to-day and just have normal meal times. As long as they're both calorie restricted, they'll both lose the same amount of weight. I think all that fasting does at times is it sets a set structure of rules. So, for example, if you're a terrible snacker at 8 p.m. at night and you say your breaking the fast window is between 12 and 8 p.m., and normally at 9 o'clock, Coronation Street's on or whatever's on at that time in the evening, I'm normally in bed by then, sat there eating, Maltesers and not really thinking about their foods.
Yeah.
That then is cut out through a rule of fasting. Yeah. But when we look at meal timing specifically, I think generally speaking, for the majority of people that go to the gym, meal timings don't matter too much to the exercise that they're doing. Yeah. There is a select group of individuals that go to the gym, those that potentially are partaking in high rocks based classes or high intensity performance, where having some form of food or snack before they go into that training session will benefit them with performance. Yeah. So I'd look at that from like a sports nutrition perspective. So the way we talk about it leading up to training or an event in sport is kind of the 2 to 3 hours before is our last big meal. So it's our last opportunity to get a good feed in. Yeah. So that hopefully consists of some carbs, fats, and proteins, typically eaten from the Eat Well plate. So you can imagine the split sections of a third fruit and veg, a third carbohydrates, and a third kind of fats and proteins. Yeah. Now that built together as a meal could be our lunch, let's say, before we go and train 3 hours later at 4, 5 o'clock. Then obviously that's a long time to wait. And I hope nobody's paused the pod from here and gone, right, I'm just going to eat that and go to the gym. We probably need to look at a 90, 60, and potentially even a 30-minute snacking opportunity. Yeah. So 90 minutes before, last big snack is what we'd look to get in. So that might be, let's say, a bagel, for example, with maybe a sliced banana and some honey drizzled on top, like a high carbohydrate snack, because again, we're talking about the population that are going to almost compete at the gym. They're not going and just doing a back and buy sesh. They're going and doing a high intense, high rocks based class or session. Then, of course, we might look towards 60 to 30 minutes before to have a little bit of sugars. Now, if we want to stay healthy, and some of the PTs wouldn't want to prescribe or at least suggest that they could have Haribo's or a Lucozade or something that's sugary and somewhat deemed as unhealthy in the kind of well-being space, we might opt to a piece of fresh or dried fruit, because we're going to get some fructose, some sugars through that food that's then going to carry us into the session. So there we've set out a really nice timeline, 2 to 3 hours before, 90 minutes before, 60 and 30 minutes before, about ways in which we can just utilize food as a fueling tool for those bigger sessions we might do. Yeah. However, for the general population, ultimately just having set meal times, trying not to eat too close to training, I know some people that can have a full meal, like a big lasagna, and then go and do their training session. And actually it doesn't affect them. But if you've got a client that's potentially struggling with gut issues, or saying that they feel sick when they come to the gym, or that they get a stitch when they're doing activity, or they feel like they're overfilling their body, then tell them to try and have that 2 to 3 hour break between food and training. And that's probably the only suggestion for those general population clients.
They're nice suggestions as well, aren't they? And they're bite size. You can take them away. The interpretation part is always quite interesting. Because clients can interpret things very differently. We did an example. I think it was last December. I watched the Chris Hemsworth series. I don't know if you've ever seen it. He was basically trialing heat therapy, cold therapy, fasting. I think he went for 36 hours, potentially longer. And he was talking about the science behind it, what how your body is reacting to, that situation. And naturally, a personal trainer will watch that and they'll communicate it to the client, and then they'll take their own interpretation of that. And we've seen examples, and they're quite funny stories, but you've seen examples where someone's taken that to the nth degree and they've fasted for 4 days. Water only for 4 days. And you're like, what? Why have you done that? Is it sustainable? Let's start with one. And if that fits and you feel the benefits for it, maybe you do that once a month. And then maybe that becomes once a week, as you develop. But I think the key part for personal trainers is when we're giving some advice around this subject is to check in on a regular basis with the client as well, just to make sure that they're staying on track, and keep cluing yourself up, keep absorbing information, listen to the likes of yourself, read research articles so that you're giving relevant information.
And I think, checking in with a client not only, just kind of helps to make sure that they're still doing what you've asked them to do, but also making sure they've not taken that to an extreme. I think 2 things off the back of that as well is I always think about like the Hard 75 challenge that goes around probably in January every year. And, we've seen incidences of people consuming that much water for their size of their body that they've ended up like hospitalized due to, the blood-brain barrier being, kind of damaged in that process, because they're consuming 7 to 8 liters of water a day because the challenge told them to, which isn't healthy. Similarly with fasting for 4 days, like, yes, a 1 day fast may have some benefit to our bodies, but actually just because we do more of it doesn't mean it's better for us. And I think just one on the kind of the articles, and I've really kind of pushed this to personal trainers, is I know research is boring to read. I've spent years, the last kind of 8 years as a nutritionist, like looking at research and trying to understand it. And we've got brilliant AI tools now where we can plug a PDF research paper in and get it to summarize it for us and give us it in lay terms that then we can receive back to our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get, if I'm a consumer as well, Dan, it's quite an interesting point this. So if I'm a consumer, if I look at a personal trainer and I can ask, are you a member of a register? So SIMSPA would be the governing body for fitness professionals. So I can know, I can verify what's the hallmark, what's the stamp of approval for a nutritionist. Yes. What is there a governing body?
Yeah, there's a few actually. So the BDA, the British Dietetics Association, has almost branches coming off that, I suppose, organisation.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it depends on what kind of, I suppose, division you're in. So for me, I'm a registered sports nutritionist, so I'm on the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register, which is the SENr for short. And then you'll also get people that are associate for nutrition, so AFN, which is then their registered nutritionist from a health-based perspective. You'll get some people that love an acronym after their name, and they'll have AFN, SENr, and MSc after the name. I just try and keep all the letters, because you can be both. And then, of course, you've got, I suppose, the clinical nutrition side of things, which are dietitians. So they're normally RDs or registered dietitians. Now, typically, you wouldn't get a registered dietitian potentially working within, I suppose, sport, or if you did, there'd be more from a clinical background, potentially focusing on disordered eating or eating disorders. They wouldn't necessarily be doing the prescription as we would do as nutritionists. You tend to find them in hospitals working more under the premise of like being a doctor to an extent, or food medicine. But actually, when we think about, the, I suppose, nutritionists that are going out on the gym floor, you want to be checking up personal trainers that, for the consumer, have they got any recognized qualifications past the level 3 nutrition qualification? Because unfortunately, that qualification doesn't give us the insurance to go and prescribe, whereas I pay a monthly membership fee or a yearly membership fee for the BDA, which gives me, all of the insurances that I need, and they back me as a nutritionist. And there's a set of code of conduct that I have to live by. You know, it's not a case of because I'm registered, I can just start throwing out random information across the board. I've got to go to so many CPD events. I've got to be, actively involved within the community of sports nutrition. There's certain, rules and regulations on, what we can and can't prescribe as nutritionists, and we have to live within those guidelines, similar to a personal trainer on the gym floor.
Absolutely. And I want to see, as a consumer, I want to see that. I want to show that you can demonstrate that. So I think that's a really important point. And from an education pathway perspective, because some personal trainers are nutritionally qualified.
Absolutely.
And they hold the licenses, and they're, affiliated with the relevant bodies. What's if I'm a level 3 PT, I see there's an opportunity to diversify, support more people within my community. What's the logistic pathway that I can follow academically?
Yeah, I think this is where the challenge starts to begin for personal trainers. And I think there isn't like a perfect solution yet to kind of courses that are as good enough to be registered with the British Dietetics Association. Yeah. So obviously a level 3 would be a natural step to go and do so. But unfortunately, we are still in the space where like you'd have to go and do either an undergraduate degree, potentially part-time alongside your personal training, or, 3 years at university full-time, which would be a big sting for any personal trainer, and probably, a kind of career suicide to disappear for 3 years just to get a qualification. But if we've already got, let's say, a lot of personal trainers maybe have a sports coaching or sports science undergraduate, we can go and do a master's degree in sports nutrition. And that does often cover the fundamentals. And we just need to find a course that is a master's degree that's affiliated with the SENr practitioning body, because then at least, as soon as you finish that course, you can become a registered member of the SENr community. And that's probably your easiest pathway. And if you've already got an undergraduate, but this is the biggest challenge in the fitness industry, is we don't have a natural pathway that doesn't pull us away from time, with our clients. Whereas, a level 3 nutrition or level 4 nutrition course that we can go and do arguably is brilliant, and it gives us a lot of information, and we can do that alongside being full-time in our practice. But arguably it doesn't give us the information or the registrations and qualifications that we maybe need to really prescribe and get stuck into nutrition.
That's a really good point. And I think if you're a personal trainer looking to enter the sector, and you might be at that age where you're thinking about university and things like that. We had an apprentice in the office a few months ago, and he was exactly that. He was thinking, do I need to go to university? I want to work in fitness. I want to be a personal trainer. Do I have to go to university? This, that, and the other. And he was, kind of computed in his mind his pathway forward. But I think you need a clear plan in your mind before you make that initial decision. So arguably, it might be better to involve yourself academically in a nutrition course, complete your degree, complete your studies, do a top up to personal training. Then you've got every aspect covered within that field. And as a market differentiator, that's massive, because you've got a blue ocean opportunity there where you can do both, 100%, the physical and the nutrition element.
And I see some personal trainers understand this topic that we're speaking about and really see the pain point in it. And some of them actually just partner with a nutritionist. There's so many sports nutritionists coming out of university at the moment that don't have, the opportunities that I was presented with when I came out of university to go work at a professional club. And they just want to get experience or work within the industry. And they are accredited and affiliated as what they call a SENr graduate. Like eventually, once you've spent 3 or 4 years in the industry, as I have done myself, I'm a SENr practitioner for the last kind of 4 years, which is the highest status effectively can be without being on the board for SENr, which I don't plan on doing anytime soon because it's a lot of work.
Too busy.
I'll try and fit that in somewhere in my day. But ultimately, partnering with a nutritionist and strengthening your team, because there's a real way of building, as a personal trainer. And we see this with some of the guys at your PT that are, real top level earners within, the industry. They don't do it all themselves. They have somebody that prescribes nutrition that's benefited. They have a psychologist that can talk about mental resilience and well-being. They have other people within their network where they can refer on, and vice versa. If you've got a nutritionist who's speaking with a client solely about nutrition, but actually their training's lacking, again, the same applies. A nutritionist shouldn't prescribe a training program to a client because they're doing the nutrition. So try and find a partner, because I think that's a really good way of doing it.
It's exactly how I run my personal training business. So when I was self-employed as a PT, I was connected with a local nutritionist and I was connected with a local physiotherapist.
Yes.
And we would cross-refer, and that worked fantastically well. I focused on exactly what I wanted to do, and I would, I would invite them to go and seek the right information from the right people in any other areas as well. Brilliant, really insightful, and it's filled in a few of my gaps as well, actually, Dan. So that's really good. Let's move on to supplements and trends. There's been a massive rise in supplementation, recreational supplementation, in the last 10 years, let's say. Are there, in the grand scheme of it, are there any supplements that you would routinely recommend? And in your, with your scientific knowledge as well, are a lot of supplements overhyped, or do they genuinely, help people perform better?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think a lot are overhyped. It's a multi-billion-pound business now, supplements, and it isn't just the MyProteins and the bulk and the kind of applied nutrition that are doing the big rounds anymore. You've got smaller supplement companies that are creating an individual product and then pushing it to market through streams like TikTok and Instagram and places like that. I think to get out of the way of the supplements that I'd recommend as a nutritionist to everybody is vitamin D is always going to be a staple, especially if you live in the UK. We're blessed with the beautiful clouds of Swansea today, and ultimately that's always great.
It's the hottest day on record.
I've not had my big coat out for a long time, and I brought that down with me. And as we were walking to the restaurant last night, we were both in the big jackets, keeping it warm. But vitamin D, ultimately, we don't get enough of it in the UK in the winter months. Rationale behind that is we can only really, on average, absorb around 20% of our vitamin D through foods. The rest of it has to come from the body, which isn't produced unless we're having sunlight hit the skin. So people say that we absorb vitamin D through sunlight. That's not quite true. Actually, the process of what happens is the vitamin D effectively activates the sun activates the vitamin D within our body. So obviously in the winter months, we don't get the opportunity to actually get that sun. We need around 15 minutes of direct sunlight of a UV of 3 or above to actually elicit vitamin D into the body. So vitamin D can be a supplement that can be used. The reason why we need vitamin D, it supports immune function, but it's also crucial in calcium absorption, which we can get enough calcium through our foods. But the problem is if we're not absorbing that calcium into the bones, we're going to end up with weak bones and potential risk factors to our kind of, I suppose, our bodies, especially when we're training. And, aging populations, looking at doing lots of sessions in the week, we don't want an athlete or a individual in the gym to become injured. So that's probably the number one that I'd recommend. And then the other one, which we'll touch on because it is a bit of a, like I say, a blurred line still, is creatine. Now, I'm involved with, some really, really good scientists, and actually was on a call yesterday, one of my calls on the way down with a guy called, a doctor called Darren Kando, and he's a Canadian scientist that has effectively dedicated his life to the research of creatine. He started researching creatine in the 90s, and he has been doing since. And ultimately they found, I say we as if I was involved, they found, in the early studies, so even going back to Steve Jennings, who's known as the creatine OG on social media, who was the initial person that actually introduced creatine in the Olympics to the GB national team in 1992. He said in studies in 1993, they were obviously trying to find the benefits of creatine for athletic performance, and they were kind of somewhat disregarding, although it was there, the health properties of creatine. And actually somebody, down the line of all these years of research went, well, hang on a minute, this paper back in 1993 said there may be a benefit to our brain health, our general bodily function, our overall well-being, and then not just muscle mass and explosive power for athletes, but stopping our bodies aging as quickly. Why don't we start looking at that again? So over the last kind of 5 years, there's been all these research papers that have now started to come out showing that creatine may have a benefit on longevity overall. Now, that's a big statement to make, and I'm by no means that scientifically inclined to actually back that statement. But you do look at the research, and I speak to these top researchers. As Darren was telling me the other day, there's actually only 9 laboratories in the whole of the world that specifically study creatine, and he's part of one of those researchers that goes and creates these studies, and they are like scientifically and clinically tested, as opposed to just a master's student at university giving a few rugby players some creatine and saying, "Oh, this is great for him."
Yeah.
So they're the two for me that I think creatine and vitamin D are a staple within the world. Now, a caveat to all supplements is recently we saw the explosion of the creatine gummy scandal. And obviously creatine, I'm saying, is a great supplement in its powder form. Yeah. The problem is people have started to try and revolutionize supplements. Now, one of the rationales behind why gummies came about was ultimately because the white powder may be associated with other forms of white powder, and its negative connotations to that ultimately stop a lot of parents letting, younger athletes or younger kids have it. Whereas you put it in a fun looking, gummy style sweet, actually it removes the stigma around the product. However, I don't need to say anymore. If anybody wants to go and look up James Smith, the kind of, I suppose, the ex-personal trainer and now kind of fitness coach or whatever you want to brand him as, influencer, and his involvement with a creatine gummy company that ultimately led him to get the product privately tested to check the levels of creatine within the product. Yeah. And it turns out that the manufacturer wasn't actually putting any creatine or very little creatine into the gummies. Oh, really? So they were selling sweets effectively at a high price, most expensive sweets I think that have ever hit the market, which then led to a wide investigation of all creatine gummies going under the microscope. And a study done across 10 different products actually showed that at least 50% of them had a lot less creatine or a significantly less amount of creatine within each gummy than what was advertised on the packaging. Okay. So you might be sat there taking these creatine gummies and thinking, these are brilliant, these are great, I'm getting so much benefit from them. Yeah. And actually it's just a placebo effect because you're not actually getting the creatine in. I was with a professional club over the summer, and this was before this story broke, and we were so close to signing up with a creatine gummy company and doing that for the lads because it was easier than, having the make up creatine shakes. And I'm so glad that I kind of held off knowing that something was amiss with this. Yeah. And then there's other supplements like protein powders. I know I'm going to get slammed for saying that I don't think we need protein powders in the fitness industry too much. There is a time and a place for convenience.
Yes.
Food first is always the option. Yeah. If you have the option of having a meal that has that hit of protein in, I don't see why we'd substitute that out for a protein powder. Yeah. However, if we're finishing the gym and we've got an hour's drive to work and we haven't got the opportunity to eat in the car because we value our lives and we don't want to crash while eating at the wheel, a protein shake might be advisable in that scenario. But it has to be specific to the individual, not just a general prescription of everyone needs a protein shake after training. Similar with protein bars. Yeah. And then the other one is electrolytes. Electrolytes are getting so much hype at the minute in and around sport, but also the general population. We are aware that electrolytes are good for overall hydration. However, we need to be sweating excessively daily to actually require an electrolyte. Putting a pinch of salt in your water in the morning will do just as good as having an electrolyte every morning and is a lot cheaper alternative versus trying to push a product, an electrolyte out there for everybody to take. Yeah. Now, yes, if you're going to the gym and you're doing maybe a run, a class, a big training session, an electrolyte in the morning will benefit you later in the day when you do sweat out all those electrolytes. But naturally found electrolytes are in foods anyway, sodium, potassium, etc., are found within foods. So as long as we're eating regularly across the day, we'll hit that number of electrolytes. And I've seen it where some people will have an electrolyte tablet in their water every single time they drink, and actually they go over their sodium intake or their salt requirement for the day because they're having too much electrolytes. Yeah. So they're kind of the big ticket, I suppose, supplements. We could sit, if we had the time, and talk about some of the TikTok trends of Shilajit and CMOS and these random supplements that keep appearing in my kind of group chats with athletes.
Yeah. And there's normally a story associated.
Or picked from the Himalayan mountains or whatever. Yeah.
I've heard a few of them. But I mean, for me, I guess, Dan, the clue is in the name, supplementing your daily nutritional needs.
Absolutely.
So if you're not deficient in any areas, if you're ticking all the boxes through food first, there is no need to supplement. No. And let's be realistic about this. Let's translate it to what your actual health objective is as well. Yeah. Because I think a lot of the time there is a scattergun approach at best when it comes to supplementation. And it's like, I saw something, and the way people consume information now, everything's really fast and brash. If you go in, my thoughts on social media, but if you go on social media, you will be presented with lots of stigma and information, and everyone's got their own sort of narrative or product to push. And I think everyone's got to be quite careful around that. But seeking the professional guidance is the starting point, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing now on social media is people are cropping and picking the research that they want to use. Or, for example, I may have said something on this podcast. Somebody could quite happily clip up that electrolytes are brilliant for everybody and use that as marketing for their electrolyte product. So you'll see some of these big names in the nutrition world that are obviously getting a decent chunk of money to promote a specific product to mass market. And, you know, money can talk at times. And actually the research might be out there specifically for that product, although they may be not in agreement with the research because of who's sponsored it, or, you know, potentially they're missing out key vital information within that. But then they'll happily push the product and pop that research paper up on an advert to suggest this is why we're selling this specific product to everybody. But I think actually when we strip it back, like you say, is when we take away the noise of social media and marketing and the money that's backed behind it, I think ultimately we have to think about it from a logical perspective. It's like a lot of people should just be going food first. There isn't necessarily a rationale to always have supplements.
Yeah, absolutely. The two on my radar, you mentioned them both there. I use creatine on a daily basis, and I do use a protein, a whey protein, because it's so busy. It's hard to get it all through food. So I know, but I know not to overdose on it as well.
Absolutely.
Or just purely rely on it for my food intake. But that's really good insight, I think, there, Dan. The other point I want to touch on, because this is becoming more and more prevalent day by day in the industry, is what we are now seeing around medicated weight loss journeys in particular. So referring to medication like GLP-1.
Yes.
And we can extend that to other peptides as well, which are, you know, prevalent. But how can personal trainers support someone on a medicated journey? Because this isn't going to go away. You know, this is going to be something that PTs are going to continue to be presented with. I think as fitness professionals, we need to understand, again, our boundaries and how we can support those journeys.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good, you know, kind of area for me where I'm probably not as clued up as some of the others within the industry. And actually that scope of practice and staying in your lane, I think, is really important for not just personal trainers, but like myself as a sports nutritionist. Now, I'm starting to see it creep into sport, which is where it gets a concern for me, and I start to go and do the reading. Initially, I think it was very much in and around the kind of health and fitness space. And actually, in some of the environments that I've been within recently at events, I'm hearing it more and more used in the wrong way, in a sense, I suppose is the best way of describing it from a GLP-1 perspective, where, you know, being in at events where there's like clearly, you know, kind of fit influencers or fitness influencers that are, you know, well-trained, you know, going to the gym regularly and coming to me at these fitness events and asking about how they medicate for a photo shoot, for example, and how do I get lean for a holiday? And, you know, I'm going to use this assisted medicated, you know, way of doing it, whether it be Manjaro or Retta or any of these. And again, you know, actually without prescription is illegal to kind of possess, from what I'm aware. Again, I might be wrong, or the guidelines might have changed in the last 24 hours, but arguably it's making sure that the people that are using the medication are actually the people that should be using the medication, and not those that maybe are just trying to get a bit leaner for the lads' holiday in Ibiza. And that's where the line is becoming very, very blurred at the minute, is we're getting people that believe they need to be on Manjaro or a health-based supplement, a weight loss medication, and actually they don't fit the criteria for it. And that can become a real concern for a personal trainer, because you don't have the ability or the scope of practice to dictate whether somebody takes it or not. And the, I suppose, scary side for me, and I'm speaking as an individual for myself when I'm seeing it in the industry day to day, is that because these are being sold and there's a profit to be made from them, there's a lot of pharmacies, specifically in the supermarket space, whereby they will try and get you to the top dose of GLP-1 as soon as possible, because they know that that's going to be the most expensive dose of medication. And that's where we have to be really careful. And I think if it's coming from a professionally guided advice where we are at danger of our health and a risk of our health, because we are potentially in a position where we are so obese that we are risking our health, and also the fact that potentially we have exhausted all options of nutrition and training and all of those aspects, then that's the moment to start looking at, medication assisted weight loss. And I know Ollie Patrick, great friend of both of ours, speaks very well around the GLP-1 topic. And I take a lot of my learnings from him and ask him many questions on it. And I think one of the big things for me, for personal trainers trying to support somebody, in that kind of vein and environment is, go and do some reading around it, not from the websites of these pharmacies, but like actual research papers. Understand the risk factors of, firstly, losing so much weight in a short space of time. And then secondly, also, I think looking at kind of some of the research that's coming out that isn't necessarily positive. So like detriment to our bone health, our muscle function are going to affect our training load and our ability to perform in the gym. But similarly, I think there's also this really odd kind of area for personal trainers where, yes, we want to praise our clients for weight loss and we want to celebrate successes, but just be mindful that obviously if they're doing it medicated, we don't want to be promoting too much positivity around it that they can't then stop being medicated and go back to kind of, I suppose, a standard nutritional and exercise approach.
Yeah. I think the key points in taking from that, Dan, is if I'm a fitness professional, is ask lots of questions.
Absolutely.
Have that mindset of, you want to learn, you want to understand the psychology behind it, where the conversation originated. Was it with a healthcare professional?
Yes.
Was it with someone selling it on eBay? Because I think that's where the conversation needs to start. But as fitness professionals, we should all be aspiring to help our clients achieve long-term, lasting change.
Sustainability.
Yeah. So the habitual habits, we talked about that earlier. The ability to influence lifestyle change long-term. I think it's got to come down to it. So through your questioning process, you can see where this has originated, and then what the aspirations are. Do you see this as being a forever kind of medicated journey, or is there a cutoff point? And then at that cutoff point, how can we support the development into long-term sustainable change?
Yeah, I think breaking through the noise as well. I had an advert the other day, and maybe because I'm in the sphere of nutrition with DRN Nutrition on Instagram, where Serena Williams, the ex-tennis and Wimbledon champion, was promoting the lifestyle of using a weight loss injection because she struggles with her weight loss ever since she had kids and gave up playing tennis full-time professionally. And I think the quote that she used, and I'm definitely going to butcher this and get it wrong, was like, it's not just, it was something about it's a way of life, or it's a lifestyle of like, as if this should be like normal within people's lives. Yeah. And I don't have, the credentials or understanding that, physiologically and metabolically, some people might need to be utilizing that. And no matter what they do, they would never be able to shift the weight because their bodies are in such disarray that they wouldn't be able to get to a point of health again. I understand from that perspective. But when you've got an ex-champion in sport, getting paid probably quite handsomely to promote this product, that's what scares me, because that then sends alarm bells ringing for myself already, knowing that this is probably going to become more of a pandemic as opposed to something that supports people. And we don't know the long-term side effects of rapid weight loss, and we don't know the long-term side effects of these products yet. And they won't come without, their side effects. And I think that's going to be the real concern. I was listening to a podcast and speaking with some, health and fitness professionals that are in the space of the weight loss jabs. And they were talking about, in a few months or years to come, the development of the weight loss injection won't just be for weight loss. It'll also be for preservation and building muscle mass. So effectively, there'll be people who will be able to sit at home, not go to the gym, eat what they want, medically, create muscle, not necessarily like a steroid where we have to work for it, but medically support muscle. Again, speaking out of turn, it's just what I'm hearing through the circles that I'm within. But actually then you've got to think about what the damage is on the, the cardiovascular system if we're not exercising and we're just having the body we want. Yeah. And I think there's no better prescription of medication than exercise and nutrition.
Yeah. Well, you're speaking, preaching to the converted. So yeah, I get it. And I think everyone should scrutinize, particularly where there's a significant financial gain for these manufacturers, scrutinize everything, look at the data, look at the research, and make a decision based wholly on that. Dan, that's absolute gold. We're coming to the end of the podcast, believe it or not.
We're getting there.
Absolutely flown. We, as a rule of thumb on the pod, we always give the last word to the guest. and having you in the seat today, it's been great from a nutrition perspective. Obviously, you've got to know your personal training really well. In the last few years, you've spent time with some of our high-performing PTs throughout the UK at events like Level Up. And you've obviously been a personal trainer, albeit maybe not
a proper one,
not properly, at some point with your journey as well. So you've observed the industry, you've been involved in the industry, and you've seen a lot of high-performing coaches. From your perspective, your professional perspective, what kind of traits stand out to you when you look at a high-performing coach? And you can extend this into sport as well, because naturally you would have seen lots of high-performing coaches there. What stands out as the key 2 or 3 traits that you see from every high-performing coach?
Definitely. And you've just reminded me about PerformX, and we'll have to touch on the can before we end today's pod. We could finish with that anecdotal story once we've gone through this. And I think for me, when I look at high-performing coaches, there is some real clear vision and clarity on what they do and how they become the kind of coach that they are. I think a bit of tenacity, which is a word that often doesn't get used, and that kind of get-go action and really wanting to, rock the industry or create a wave, I think is something that a lot of coaches need. I've seen some of, like you say, the top performers at your PT, and I've seen ones that have gone through adversity, and I've seen ones that have moved gyms. But nothing changes for them because they've got that same hardy mindset that just gets them through. And, I could give you some, real life examples, and I'm sure you could have. Some of the PTs I've watched across your PT that have moved to a brand new gym, but they've implemented the same strategies and the same effective routines within that gym and had the same, if not better, success because they learn each time they do it. And I think for me, the other word that I'd use from a habit point of view is dedicated. You look at some of the guys that win PT of the quarter, they are ultimately dedicated to their craft. And I think that is so important. I think we spoke last night walking back from the restaurant about, doing what you love. And I think if personal training isn't something that's sparking, the love, and don't get me wrong, getting up at 5 a.m. every morning, if you've got a client at 6, you might not love doing that, but you may still seek joy within that. You don't have to always love it. And you don't need to have a work-life balance, because if you love the work that you're doing, that becomes the hobby, it becomes the routine, and that is the balance effectively. I think for me, finding your love, and if you're sat here now listening to this thinking personal training is really what I love to do, then show that every day with a smile on your face on the gym floor. Be the person that you want to be on the gym floor. And I think you can't go too far wrong if you've got those two kind of tenacity and dedicated workloads and work rates. The rest will come. Clients will eventually come. Using the strategies that you guys put in place for those personal trainers is a proven success. So having that to your disposal is ultimately going to benefit any personal trainer.
I think 2 very good examples there of traits. And we see it day in, day out. We're very proud of the network that we've developed at your PT. And I think those are key fundamentals that you need. They're pretty much non-negotiables as well, aren't they?
Absolutely.
You need to be a high performer. Let's talk about the cactus then to finish. So the story here, you delivered at PerformX this year where we hosted Level Up, which is our education series aimed at fitness professionals. Whilst you were speaking, there was a chap at the back of the audience distributing out of a can, which was unlabeled at the time, cactus juice. And I tried it, and I was like, this is pretty good. And I suggested you need to have a chat with Dan, about the health properties and the benefits around your product. So, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so obviously PerformX Live, doing the Level Up event. We've done so many Level Up events, and I think the PerformX one was a standout for me. I'm looking forward to obviously being back next year, if I'm allowed to say that. If not, cut it out.
Oh, but we're committed.
Exactly. So I'm really looking forward to delivering, and we're going to, like we say, come up with a title that really brings personal trainers together when it comes to nutrition. But anyway, stood on the stage delivering my talk, and at the end of the talk, I very rarely take a shot from a stranger off an unmarked can. But Simon Elliott, who by trade is a toxicologist, had developed this product, which is PRCK, although to the viewers may look like a different word, which is prickly pear cactus juice. So I didn't know very much about it. And interestingly, the end of the talk came up with a clean shot glass, thankfully. It's not the one you drank from, and gave me a drink. And I thought, this is brilliant. I said, I'll take a can and I'll do a bit of digging. And actually the can that he had with him was the first prototype of the product. So he didn't have any other cans to spare. So I got a business card, didn't think much of it. And then a few weeks later, I think I was going out for a meal with the missus. Put your hands in your pocket and go, what's this? And I just remember reading the PRCK and chuckling to myself as to what it might look like, and thinking, actually, spend a bit of time and research this, because there might be something in this. And this is where the networks of personal training and all of those aspects come in, and actually reached out to Simon, was chatting away around kind of the product itself and the health benefits. So, we've ran a few focus groups, we've raised a bit of capital within the business now, and we've started ultimately working out what our audience is. And we've realized that it's such a versatile product, prickly pear cactus. So ultimately, prickly pear cactus is the little flowers that are on a cactus themselves, and they're then juiced down and created into a sparkling beverage. Thank you for bringing a cactus in from home as well. It looks a great kind of
keep it
on the table,
nurture it, absolutely.
Feed it some prickly pear cactus juice, give it back some of its own nutrients, and arguably the health benefits from it is not necessarily something that we've ever seen within a drink before. And like you say, the taste of it is quite unique, but quite enjoyable to try. And we'll get some cans sent across, and I'm sure we'll do something with some of the PTs as well, and help them out with sampling some of the products. But the health and well-being properties from it is it helps to remove toxins and free radicals from the body. It also helps with inflammation and reducing antioxidant properties in the body, and arguably supports overall health and well-being. Now, one of the lesser known benefits of the product is it can be used to an extent, and I have to be careful, I'll word the research on this, as a hangover cure, because of the hydrating nature of it, and then the properties that it contains. It helps to remove the toxins, the alcohol from the body quicker, to help reduce, kind of the hangover from there. But we're not going after it being a hangover cure. What we're trying to look towards is that the market in fizzy drinks at the moment, and this is what really pulled me in, is saturated with, either one of two things: super, super high sugar products. So you see some of these new products that are coming out that have got ridiculous number of caffeine in. And then also over the other side, we've then got the products that are not high in sugars, but are high in sweeteners and high in E numbers and words we've never seen on a can before. And that, to me, really concerns me, because we haven't got a healthy option in the middle. There are a few that are doing it quite well, but a lot of them are doing it badly, and the market is saturated with that. So what we've tried to find is a naturally sweet product that we can create as a carbonated beverage that tastes brilliant, ice cold, and can be had as either a pre or a post-training kind of beverage, and has some form of benefit to the body as well. And I say this like I developed the formula. I'm just kind of, I suppose, the spokesperson for it. Like, I've joined the company, which has been a really, enjoyable process actually, and had a lot of involvement with some of the events we've done in the market that we're going after. And for me, I didn't need selling on the product. Yes, trying it out of a shot glass was excellent and an interesting experience. But actually for me, when you get something like this come across your desk, it's hard to turn down the opportunity to work with a company like that, because there isn't anything like that out there in the market really, that is trying to tear up that fizzy drink space, which we know is so volatile with the likes of your big name companies that have got, I can't probably name them because I'm going to get done for whatever, but the companies I'm thinking of, the fizzy drink companies, and actually they don't have that healthy alternative. They have the diet or the zero options, but actually they're just full of sweeteners that have just as bad effect on the body, whereas this genuinely is an all-natural can, and we've done a lot of due diligence and testing to ensure that it actually works. And the plan going forward is to hopefully disrupt the fitness industry a little bit as well with it. So I'm sure we'll have some affiliate code for the personal trainers. We'll get a few packs sent out to some of the the PTs of the quarters, and we'll try and support the YPT brand where we can.
Absolutely, and again, personal trainers with good education around any product that we endorse is critical. So
absolutely,
they are a great vehicle to market for sure. But and I think the story in itself there, Dan, it just sums up you as a person and your entrepreneurial spirit.
Always on the lookout.
Listen, I've absolutely loved today. Thank you so much again for contributing to the Your PT pod. Excited for the future developments that we got planned as well. There's lots coming up in the world of Your PT and the relationship with DRN Nutrition. Look forward to catching up at the next Level Up event.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.